Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we are continuing with the poetry lessons. The poem we are going to do today is called Captive. I would recommend that you sit with your poem and your notes, that you can highlight and add notes while I am explaining. It is a beautiful day to learn something new, so here we go. We're going to read through the poem together. Captive. Lament of a sick cause a mine labourer in a compound hospital. As a wild bird caught in a slip-knot snare, the plaited tail hairs of a dun-coloured cow, almost invisible, so tethered in the toils of fever, do I lie and burn and shiver while I listen to the buzzing of flies that flutter vainly against cold, hard, deceiving window panes. Like them, I would escape, and escaping hasten to my home that shines in a valley afar. My home, brightest tooth in the jaws of distance. There, now, the cows I love are feeding in some quiet sun-washed vale. Their lazy shadows drink the sunlight rippling on the grasses. There, through the long day, girls and women among the mealies chant and hoe. Their swinging hoes are like the glitter of sunshine on water. There, now, shouting, happy herd boys, while they watch the cattle browse, are busy moulding mimic cattle from clay moist and yellow. There, where the sun has folded his wings that dazzle, and has sunken to his hidden nest beyond the hills, all shall group together gaily around the crackling fires, and chew the juicy cud of gathered day. And greybeards shall tell stories of ancient battles and cattle races of days of old, of hunters bold and fearless who faced the lion's thunder and stalked the lightning leopard to his lair. But here I burn and shiver and listen to the buzzing of the flies against deceiving window panes. Now, first of all, we're going to look at the background of the poem. It is important that you know about the background of a poem so that you can answer a question like, do you think the poet was justified in saying the following? Or do you agree with the poet when he said da-da-da? So that you know, where does he come from? Why did he write this poem? What motivated him? What was behind writing all of this? So this poem was written from the point of view of a Xhosa mine labourer that was sick in hospital. Migrant workers, now those are people who moved from one place to another to find work, had to leave their families and work far away from home. The conditions were far from ideal. The housing was huge, overcrowded rooms, hard and dangerous labor. So it was difficult conditions where they lived and where they worked. They had to move away from home. There was no work where they were living in the rural areas. They had to move away from home in order to provide for their families. And then these conditions led to the spread of infectious diseases such as TB, what most probably happened to our speaker in this poem. The type of poem is a monologue. Now, a monologue is a long speech by one person, and this is a personal lyrical poem written in free verse. Now, I'm saying it's personal because it's written from the point of view of a migrant mine worker who is sick. So he's unable to go home. He escapes his reality in this poem by using his imagination to return home. He's thinking and imagining what is going on at home. He is imagining what it is like at home. But at the end, he returns to his own reality again. The tone, that's the first one of the 3 T's. Remember, tone, title, themes. You must learn all of those. You must know the tone of each of the poem, the title, everything about the title, and then all the themes concerned with every poem that you have to study. In this poem, the tone in line 1 to line 8. We see that the poem, remember the tone is what you hear. So the tone here is sadness or despair or hopelessness, because the speaker reflects on his current unpleasant circumstances. Line 9 to line 30, the tone changes to joyful, happy, nostalgic. He thinks about his home. That is where he flees. He goes in his imagination. He goes back home to imagine what it would be like right now over there. And then unfortunately in line 31 and 32, it's a tone of bitterness and despair because he returns to the reality of his current trapped circumstances. The title. Now, captive means to be imprisoned, to be confined or restricted. In other words, you are not free. You cannot do as you like. Something is holding you captive. It describes how this migrant mine worker is feeling. He is feeling trapped because of his circumstances. Number one, his illness keeps him trapped in hospital. He is simply too ill to get out of bed. He can't go home because of his work at the mine. He has to stay there. He has to stay at the mine to work because he has to provide for his family at home. There's no work at home. The economic situation that forces him to work away from his home. This title has a subtitle, Lament of a Sick Xhosa Mine Laborer in a Compound Hospital. I'm going to explain all the words to you. Lament means a passionate expression of sorrow. Now this is what this mine worker is doing. The speaker is expressing his sorrow about his horrible circumstances, about the fact that he wants to go home. He longs to be at home. He is a sick Xhosa mine laborer, sick. He's a mine worker suffering from an illness. Mine laborer, I've already explained to you, a migrant worker that had to move away from his home to find work in order to look after his family. And then a compound hospital is a hospital on the mine grounds close to the compounds. Now the compounds was the hostel type lodgings. These hostels was huge, overcrowded rooms, as I told you about the situation and everything that was not ideal. So now with the title and the top subtitle, it shows that this speaker is homesick as he is in hospital far from home, somewhere he does not want to be. If we look at the themes, first of all, captivity or captivity, freedom versus captivity, and then the effects of migration. Now, first of all, the first one, captivity. What is causing his captivity? First of all, it can be his fever and his illness preventing him from getting out of hospital, out of bed, going home. He is captive to his work. He needs the money to send home for his family. And the life he is living is keeping him captive. He does not have a choice to better himself. There's no opportunity for a better education, to get a better job. This is his life. So his life is keeping him captive. And then the effects of migration, it results in homesickness. Because of poverty, he had to move far away to work under horrible, harsh conditions, and as a result, he fell ill or he was injured, and now he cannot return. The summary, we can assume that he is a migrant laborer, a casual and unskilled worker who moves from one area to another, offering services on a temporary, usually seasonal basis. He takes on menial and back-breaking work with little rest and get paid a minimal wage. And this poem also highlights the injustice of mine laborers, and they are worked to death. Line 1. As a wild bird caught in a slip-knot snare. Now, the word as tells us immediately he starts with a simile. But first we have to look at the meaning of the words slip-knot snare. Now, slip-knot snare is a small bird trap made of tail hair of a cow. Now, this bird trap, when the bird steps into the loop and walks with it, the knot slips over the string until it tightens against its leg and that bird is trapped. So now, the simile that you will see goes from line 1 up until line 4. The poet is saying here, just as a bird is trapped by this slip-knot snare, so too does the speaker feel trapped in his bed by the fever that he has. The bird in this line is a symbol of captivity. Like the bird in the trap, the speaker is unable to get out of bed. This line ends with a dash. It introduces more detail about what the snare looks like. Line 2 and line 3. The plaited tail hairs of a dun-colored cow, almost invisible. Now, the plaited tail hairs, the boys in the village made snares from the cow tail hairs. They got that cow tail hairs from the dun-colored cow. Dun-colored is a dull grayish-brown color, and those hairs were ideal. Because of the color, it made this snare almost invisible to the birds. Now, just like the bird could not see the snare, in the same way, the speaker did not see the dangers of going to work in the city. He did not know about the horrible circumstances that he would have to work in the mines, the terrible conditions, and that caused him to get ill, and eventually now he is feeling trapped. He is captive. Line 3 also ends with a dash. It creates a pause. The speaker explains the comparison between himself and the trapped bird. Line 4. So tethered in the toils of fever do I lie. So immediately the word so is the last part of the simile that he started in line 1. The speaker compares his confinement to the hospital bed to the situation of a trapped bird in a snare. Take note of the alliteration of the T, tethered and toil. It emphasizes that he is trapped in an unpleasant situation. The word tethered refers to the tying down of an animal to restrict its movement, and toils refer in this case to struggle. So tethered in the toils of fever is a metaphor. The poet feels tied down by his fever as someone would feel if he were tied down with ropes. The last 3 words in line 4 is an example of inversion. Remember, inversion is the reversal of the normal order of words. And this is to emphasize the fact that he is confined to bed and he cannot get out. And burn and shiver while I listen to the buzzing. So burn and shiver are typical symptoms of a patient with a high fever. He runs hot and then he runs cold. While I listen, we can see here the fever is controlling him. It emphasizes his captivity because he can only lie in his bed and listen to the flies. He's not able to do anything. To the buzzing, the word buzzing is a sound device called onomatopoeia, and it imitates the sound by the flies constantly flying into the window panes. Line 6 and line 7 are flies that flutter vainly against cold, hard, deceiving window panes. First of all, we look at the alliteration flies that flutter, alliteration of the F that emphasizes the helplessness of the flies. The word flutter means hovering in front of the window, flapping their wings quickly and repeatedly, vainly. Even though they are flapping their wings quickly and repeatedly, it's with no result, vainly, hopelessly. Against. Now the flies are prevented by the window because they are flying against it. Now this poet feels in the same way. He feels everything is against him. His work environment and his illness. And then personification. Cold, hard window panes. Now the cold heart is the glass of the window that is acting in a cruel manner, like people sometimes do. What is the cruel manner? It's preventing the flies from going outside, keeping them captured, keeping them trapped, and then deceiving. The window acts like a person, misleading the flies. So the illusion of freedom is there, but it's unattainable. So the words window panes, the window panes is also a symbol of captivity. The flies keep trying to fly through the window because they cannot see it. They see the outside, they don't see the window. So they keep flying into the window and they can't get to the outside. This line 7 ends with a colon. It indicates that the poet is going to explain or add something important. Remember, throughout these lines, we see a tone of sadness, despair, and hopelessness. And then in line 8, like them, I would escape, and escaping hasten. Immediately he starts with a simile, like them. Them are the flies. So he's saying the speaker is just as eager to escape as the flies are. Like the flies, he feels helpless. Like them, I would. Again, an example of inversion, to express his wish to be able to return home. He uses the word would because it refers to a situation that is unlikely or impossible. Escape. He wants to escape from his feverish illness and the hospital room in the mining compound to his home in a valley in the Eastern Cape. He repeats the word escape to emphasize the fact that he feels trapped and he is eager to get away as soon as possible. Remember, when something is repeated, it's always to emphasize something else. And then he used the word hasten, which means hurry or speed. If he had the opportunity, he would leave as fast as he possibly could. Remember, this is the last line where we have the tone of sadness and despair and hopelessness. In line 9, the tone changed to one that is happy, nostalgic, and even sometimes joyful. Now he says, to my home that shines in a valley afar. So the word shines immediately creates a positive connotation of tempting beauty and freedom. In a valley afar, the word afar emphasized the great distance from his home. So now he travels home in his imagination. And typical of this type of memory is the hard times are left out. He only remembers everything that is good. Look at the contrast between the happiness of his home and the unhappiness of the mines, the freedom of the pastoral life versus the suffering in the city hospital. My home. Again, line 9, he said the word home, and now he repeats it. So repetition, it emphasizes his desperate longing for home. Brightest tooth in the jaws of distance. Now the word brightest tooth is a metaphor as well as hyperbole. Metaphor, his home is compared to a tooth in a jaw filled with many teeth. And the hyperbole, he exaggerates when he says his home is the best in the valley. He idolizes it because he misses it so much. In the jaws of distance, the word distance links with the word afar in line 9 to emphasize the distance between where he is right now and where he wants to be. The jaws of distance is yet another metaphor. Distance is compared to a set of jaws. It refers to the huts set in the rural valley, which from a distance look like teeth in a jaw. It can also mean the mine worker's distance from home is referred to as if it has jaws that can eat things and make them disappear. Line 11 and line 12. There now, the cows I love are feeding in some quiet, sun-washed vale. So now we can see in these two lines, he's thinking back fondly, he's reminiscing of the cows that are grazing back home in the valley. He starts line 11 with there. There refers to his rural home. Again, the contrast or the antithesis between there and here. The people at his rural home are free and happy, while he is sick and captive in a hospital room. His second word, there, now. He knows exactly what happens at what time. He is so familiar with what goes on at home that he knows exactly what will be happening at a certain time of the day. The cows I love are feeding. Now, cows are symbolic of simple farm life. And remember, cows are the most valued assets of rural people. You will see he mentions cows a lot of times further in the poem. In some quiet sun-washed vale. A vale is a valley. Sun-washed refers to the sun covering everything in sunlight, and it highlights a feeling of belonging. The tone here is nostalgic and a sense of longing. Line 13 and 14. Their lazy shadows drink the sunlight, rippling on the grasses. Now, you will see that the speaker continues now to give detailed descriptions because he knows life in the valley intimately. And he uses personification. The shadows drink the sunlight. The shadows are personified. They are lazy and they drink the sunlight. So the cow's shadows move the sunlight away from the grass as if it is sucking it up or absorbing the sunlight. Furthermore, if you go on to line 14, it's a metaphor. The heat waves created by the sun is said to make the same rippling movements as stirring water will do. So he compares the shadows to something drinking water. Line 15 and 16. There through the long day, girls and women among the mealies chant and ho. He starts off again with the word there that he's repeating. And when it's repetition, it's to emphasize, and he's emphasizing the longing to be part of the village life. So he constantly reminds us of the contrast between there and here. Take note of the alliteration of the T. There, through, the. Now this emphasizes their contentment with their situation. Through the long day. Now the long day implies that it was very hard work, but they are content and happy. Remember, the poet only mentions the good things. The hard times are left out. The girls and women among the mealies chant and ho. The word chant means to sing a repetitive rhythmic song to emphasize the happy, content mood. And hoe. A hoe is a long-handled gardening tool used for weeding. In this case, the women are removing the weeds. Lines 17 and 18. Their swinging hoes are like the glitter of sunshine on water. Their swinging hoes are like, immediately a simile, so like the sunlight reflects on the hoe when it's moving. The water glimmers when sunlight reflects on it. It creates a peaceful atmosphere. Again, the poet focuses on the good things, the women working peacefully together, not mentioning working in the scorching heat. Line 19 and line 20. There, now, shouting happy herd boys while they watch the cattle browse. Again, the word there. Now it was repeated in line 11, line 15, now in line 19, and you'll see in line 23 again. Repetition to emphasize the contrast between the happy life at his rural home and the trapped, unhappy life at the mines. Again, the word now that shows you he knows exactly what is happening at this time at his rural home. So he's familiar with the customs of his people. Shouting happy herd boys. Herd boys are the boys taking care of the cattle while they watch the cattle browse. Now, the cattle are grazing and feeding on the grass, and I told you about the repeated reference to the cattle. This is the foundation of rural life. And he's still talking about the boys. They are busy molding mimic cattle from clay, moist and yellow. So they are busy molding to shape clay images of cattle with clay. Mimic is the imitation. So the boys are making imitations of real cattle using slightly wet, moist and yellow mud, the clay. We move over to stanza 3. There where the sun has folded his wings that dazzle and has sunken to his hidden nest beyond the hills. Now, again, the repetition of there, like I mentioned with the previous slide to emphasize the contrast between the two places. Very important here is the metaphor when the sun has folded his wings and has sunken to his hidden nest beyond the hills. The setting of the sun beyond the hills is compared to a bird folding its wings as it descends into its nest to settle down for the night. Make very sure you remember this is a metaphor. We had candidates in the past who said it is personification. Personification is to give human qualities. Now, wings has nothing to do with human qualities, so it is a metaphor. The word dazzle. Dazzle is usually brightness that blinds you temporarily. In this case, it has a twofold meaning. It can either mean the amazing beauty of the setting sun or the brightness of the sun on the horizon. Line 25 and 26. All shall group together gaily around the crackling fires and chew the juicy cud of gathered day. He starts line 25 with the word all, which means everybody is gathered together around the campfire, and it creates a sense of togetherness, and maybe it makes him feel even more alone. All shall group together gaily. They'll be joyful. They'll be happy. Around the crackling fires, another example of a sound device, onomatopoeia. Crackling is the word that imitates the sound of the burning fires. And chew the juicy cud of gathered day. Now, to chew the juicy cud is a metaphor. Just as the cows chew cud. Now, cud is the grass they have previously chewed and swallowed. The events of the day are discussed after they have happened. Now, the juicy means these stories that they are discussing, the events are interesting and colorful. Of gathered day. Gathered day can have twofold meaning. All the people that gather at the campfire or the events of the day gathered as they are retold in the form of stories. The word cud, the meaning, as I said when I explained the metaphor, is partly chewed food, grass chewed again by the cows. So these two lines shows us there's an atmosphere of people being happy, being content, in contrast to the unhappy miner who is all alone. Line 27 and 28. And greybeards shall tell stories of ancient battles and cattle races of the day of old. Now the word greybeards in line 27 is an example of metonymy. Now metonymy again is a figure of speech in which one thing is replaced with a word closely associated with it. So the word implies the age and wisdom which are associated with someone having a grey beard. Shall, it indicates the speaker's certainty that this is what the older people will be talking about. You've seen the word shall in the previous lines. It is to indicate his certainty that this is going to happen. And then they shall tell stories of ancient battles and cattle races of day of old. And in the next line, you'll see of hunters, bold and fearless. So the elders tell stories about their history. You see that in the battles, their sport, the cattle races, and then the hunting when he speaks about the hunting of the lion and the leopard in line 29, where he goes on of hunters, bold and fearless. He remembers their stories, who faced the lion's thunder and stalked the lightning leopard to his lair. So the lion's thunder is a metaphor. The lion's ferocity is compared to the sound of thunder, which will instill fear in anyone. And stalked, when you stalk, is to follow the animal without being seen in order to catch or to kill him. The lightning leopard to his lair. Lightning leopard, the speed of the leopard is compared to the speed with which lightning strikes. And then he returns. The tone changes again to bitterness and sadness and hopelessness and despair. And he starts with the word but, which immediately shows us it brings a change of mood. He says, but yeah. I burn and shiver and listen to the buzzing of the flies against deceiving window panes. So with the words but here, the speaker immediately returns to the reality of being trapped by his illness in his hospital bed. The repetition of what is said in lines 5 to 7, and it's said here, it emphasizes his captivity. He's held captive by his illness, by his job, and by the distance from his home. And the deceiving window panes. The windows allow him a deceptive view of freedom. Like the flies, he can also see the outside, but he cannot experience it at this point in time. And here he realizes that he has deceived himself. He is captive of his circumstances. He is a captive of his reality. If we have a quick look at some questions, if you attended the lesson a few days ago of the poetry exam questions, we did a few questions that they asked about captive. We're quickly going to look at that. What is being compared in lines 1 to 4? Remember, I told you the simile runs through from line 1 to line 4, and it's just as a bird is trapped by a slipknot snare, so too does the speaker feel trapped by the fever that he has. Refer to line 4, so tethered in the toils of fever do I lie. Explain in your own words why this metaphor is effective in the context of the poem. Please take note of the words in your own words. It's so very important to answer in your own words unless you're asked to quote. The metaphor is effective in the context of the poem because the speaker feels tied down by his fever as someone would feel if he was tied down with rope. And then quote 2 consecutive words to prove that the flies inside the hospital room is a symbol of captivity. They flutter vainly. Explain why the window panes are described as deceiving in line 7. Remember, that is the personification that we spoke about. The clear glass of the window panes appears as if the flies can fly through, but this is deceptive as the barrier of glass prevents them from doing so. Refer to line 9 and 10. To my home. What is the function of the repetition? Remember, he's repeating the words my home. And always when it's repetition, it's to emphasize something. It emphasizes the speaker's desperate longing for his home. Home represents a place where he is comfortable and where he belongs. Refer to line 13. That's the one about the shadows drinking the sunlight. Identify the figure of speech. It's personification. The personification of the shadow shows the stillness of the cows, or the personification is extended to the ideas of the shadows drinking the sunlight, referring to the shadows absorbing the sunlight. Take careful note, he only asked about line 13 because the metaphor is in the next line. So that is why we are dealing with personification here. Go back with your notes if you want to. Then refer to stanza 2, name the 2 things that the herd boys are doing. They are shouting with joy, they are watching the cattle, they are creating toy cattle from clay, any 2 of those. Refer to line 23, there where the sun has folded his wings that dazzle. The figure of speech, and I told you to watch out for this one, it is a metaphor because the sun is compared to a bird folding its wings as it is settling down in its nest. And then obviously to what does there in this line refer? Now it's his home, the home of the mine laborer, the rural area from which he comes, or his rural home. Name 2 types of stories that were related by the elders around the campfire. Ancient battle, cattle races, hunters. Identify his tone in the last 2 lines. It's a tone of sadness, frustration, regret, hopelessness. And then we get to the longer question. Remember, I told you, title, tone, and theme, all of those you have to know. So he's asking, discuss how the theme of captivity is evident in this poem. The speaker draws an analogy between himself and a bird that is trapped in a snare to illustrate he's held captive by his illness. The speaker feels trapped by the fact that he's in a city and unable to experience the freedom of life in the rural area. The idea of deceiving window panes is repeated to emphasize the feeling of captivity he experiences. The windows allow him a view of freedom which he cannot experience at this point in time. Remember, this speaker is trapped. He is held captive by his own life. Consider the poem as a whole. Do you feel sorry for the speaker? Remember, if you get a question like this, you can either answer yes or no, or you can give a combination answer of yes and no. Just make sure your motivation fits with your yes or no. Do you feel sorry for him? He was forced by circumstances to move away, to find work, to provide for his family. Then he became ill. Now he's trapped. He is facing the possibility of perhaps never returning home. Or no, everyone must work to provide for their family. He was lucky enough to find a job. When he became sick, he could go to hospital, and he still has the memories of his home. Discuss the suitability of the title. This is a typical question why I told you you have to know the information about the title. They're asking you, is this title suitable? The title describes the trapped feeling the miner is experiencing. Being held captive would mean that a person is unable to move or act freely. You are forced to do or be somewhere where you don't want to be. In this poem, the title refers to the speaker feeling trapped as a result of his illness, as well as the fact that he has no choice but to work on a mine far from home. Remember, questions they ask frequently in a poetry is about the theme, the tone, all the figures of speech, the title, and then when you have to answer the open-ended, make your point, explain, give an example, and then link it back to your question. Right, this concludes the lesson on the poem Captive. I sincerely hope that all of you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a wonderful afternoon and make wise choices. Goodbye.